Drug maker Eli Lilly caps the cost of insulin, ultra-fast insulin drug, to be removed from PBS.
What's going on with insulin? What's going on with diabetes?
Apple is reportedly closer to bringing no-prick glucose monitoring to the watch.
If you are a person who is afflicted by this disease or at risk for this disease, and I'm one of these people.
Common sweetener erythritol tied to high risk of stroke and heart attack.
Were you really consuming it thinking there would be no price to pay at some point? The views shared in the podcast are our own and do not reflect the views of our employers. These are very much our own views and opinions. So I think once you make it past episode 7, you apparently somehow find a figment of strength to move on and think it's worthy. So
what's with the number 7? Isn't there some kind of 7-year relationship thing as well? They call it the 7-year itch.
A very normal lifespan for a cell to basically decide to call it quits. You know, a cell will divide, replicate DNA, and after 7 years, I'm kind of done, and just like go to the apoptosis and then destroy itself.
A few PhD students right now are crying.
7 years is not the longest I've heard for a PhD to be completed.
That's right. How long was your PhD?
All my experiments were finished within 3 years,
right,
which I very much appreciate is on the short end.
Yeah, very much so.
Most biological science PhDs go for 4 or 5 years, right? How long did yours stay?
Pretty much 4 years spot on to submission, so that included writing. I don't know.
In the US, a 5-year PhD is kind of the minimum, right? On that tone of things, feeling interminable and never-ending, welcome to the Crossover Connections podcast. This is episode 4. My name is Jack Wang. I'm a scientist, specifically a microbiologist, and I also work as a teaching professor at an Australian university. Amanda, what's your area of expertise?
I've got a PhD in cell biology, and I currently work as a manager of clinical research.
And this podcast, to recap, is our way of navigating all the news headlines in areas that we are supposed experts in. But every time I read one of these headlines, I'm learning new things, which is really exciting, but also a little depressing at the same time that we don't already master all of these domains of knowledge. And that just reflects how difficult knowledge is to learn. It's never a finite ending. It's a constant learning developmental journey that we have to go on. And this is our attempt at chronicling that rather embarrassing process for two seeming professionals in this area of science.
For everyone to know about.
To really push it out of our comfort zone, this podcast talks about all sorts of areas, science, technology, and education, and how everything is connected. We have a new segment called The Connect, where we're trying to look at issues and things we talked about previously.
That's right.
And of course, when we read the headline first time, we don't know everything about it, and we kind of banter a little bit. Then we'll go back and do a bit more reading and find out either we're wrong or maybe there's more information we weren't privy to at that time and feel a bit silly. So this is our mea culpa to kind of catch up on us. And the first issue and the topic that we talked about in the last episode was all about the idea of bats being, for some reason, particularly dirty and very
vilified bats.
We vilified bats. And this is really our apology to bats, because this is the article that was a little old now. It's not actually that brand new.
Why do bats have so many viruses?
Again, this article is from a few years ago. And the main takeaway from this article is the fact that bats are so full of different viruses that can cause global pandemics is not a weakness on their behalf. It's actually very much a strength. What is their molecular or biological strength?
So a bat fan has written this. To start with, some species have an outsized number of genes for making interferons. For example, the Egyptian fruit bat, a natural host of Marburg virus, has 46 such genes. Humans have about 20.
Okay, so they're making a lot more immune protein or immune genes that could trigger the immune response and keep any infection at bay, or maybe defeat the pathogen, or keep the numbers low below a certain threshold so that it never amounts to full-blown disease. And bats have a lot more of these genes apparently than humans do. Not that humans are the ultimate benchmark. We're quite weak, relatively speaking, as a species. We get sick very easily. Not that we're the benchmark, but yeah, they've got more than double of this type of gene. Because they've got a very active immune system, they can be asymptomatic carriers where they've got the disease, but are not lying sick in bed, whatever the bat equivalent of bed would be. So they're out about in the world.
That's right, yeah.
They feel maybe a little bit off, but not off by enough to
still persevering,
to be out there in the community, doing whatever bats are doing in the community.
We could be more like bats.
And this is not just a genetic correlation. The article also posits another theory, which is connected to the bat's level of activity.
Bats are the only mammals capable of sustained powered flight. They don't just glide, a feat that required changes in metabolism. Flight is a major workout. Estimates suggest a bat's metabolic rate can increase up to 34 times over its resting level when it takes to the air.
Oh, so exercise. That's the answer.
It always comes back to exercise.
So they're genetically blessed, and they do a ton of exercise, that's apparently. Right. So that's why they're able to survive in the face of so many infections that would kill most humans.
Yeah.
and therefore spread the infection because they have the disease, but they have the symptoms. They're worse.
They exercise all the time.
The most annoying kind of metaphor for humans that are in this kind of category as well. It's not useful advice. Did you know you have to double the number of genes you have for interferon and exercise beyond your wildest dreams?
That's how you should respond to the GP that suggests this.
That's
Just
right.
bring up the interferon argument. But it would be very interesting to further study this, of course, and how these mechanisms work.
Right, but you have to put on every hazmat suit available to be able to get in the room with those bats because they are perfectly fine being infected with all the things that very much kill the vast majority of humans, or at least make us risk.
PPE or personal protective equipment that we have to wear in the lab can be intense for working on bad viruses. It would just be crazy. I wouldn't want to be in that job.
If it's not PC 3 or 4 for everything by default, I'd be very surprised. Yeah. We were veering into bat slander again. This is again an apology to bats, not to say you are dirty, dirty people.
We were in the process of apologizing, so let's not go off course.
Let's not ruin our intentions. So thank you. Not thank you. We shouldn't be thanking bats. That's a bridge too far. I refuse to thank the bats. We apologize.
Let's just tone it down.
We just apologize to the bats.
Apology to bats.
You are not dirty by default. You just have a great immune system and you exercise a ton. The next article is connecting back to our constant watch out for any artificial intelligence rumors or news headlines. And this is one that came across the wires.
Crochet enthusiast asked Chat GPT for patterns. The results are cursed.
I don't know anything about crochet. It's based on a pattern, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Okay, numbers, and I don't crochet. So
you don't crochet though,
no.
but you could download some kind of number-based set of instructions, play the guitar, so like a guitar tab or something like you see.
Yeah, I think it's sort of similar concept, yeah.
Right, and then you ask ChatGPT, hey, can you give me a crochet pattern for whatever?
It was for a specific animal, wasn't it? What's it for?
I can't tell based on these images, but the article says it's for a narwhal. You should be able to tell that
What do you see?
They're like a Donald Duck to me. I don't know.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it's got the blue sailor's outfit.
I don't remember.
It looks a little duck-like. Yeah.
So I read that those navy circles are supposed to be eyes.
Oh, what?
I have to admit, I see it as a mermaid-esque creature without a head.
Right, and the headline here is that it very much looks like an alien, and apologies if you're listening to the audio version because this doesn't make any sense to you. You're purely...
I recommend you have a look because it's quite strange.
It's quite strange, but this is a reminder that we are filming everything for YouTube, so you can watch the full version as well as snippets or on our YouTube channel, Biolab Collective, and also as well the audio version or the podcast platforms. But pretty much the main takeaway is that ChatGPT's version or AI's version of what we would very easily conceptualize and view as animals, in this case a narwhal, doesn't look anything like how we conceive narwhals look like. So that's a real disconnect in how they are extrapolating very normal objects out into a visual consciousness. I think the thing that keeps happening with AI photography, because it's the other thing, AI is generating a lot of photos and imagery that looks photorealistic. They for some reason have an issue with hands, I think there was a headline where someone used AI to generate an image that faked a protest or faked some kind of criminal activity, and the only way people figured out that this wasn't a real photo was that the protesters had like 6 fingers, or like their fingers looked a bit funny. So AI for some reason has difficulty in generating images with a consistent depiction of hands. So it's not the thing anyone predicts it would get wrong, nor is it a thing anyone thought they had to worry about, these nightmarish crochet patterns. But we're keeping an eye on this. We're very worried about what's to come.
I'm worried about my jumpers in the future.
What about your jumpers? Which designer's going to jump onto this trend and just AI to design all their patterns for the next season? Speaking of AI, there's one more in the Connect about AI, and this is eerily similar to a prophetic episode now, it turns out, of Black Mirror. Have you ever watched that show, Black Mirror?
No, I've never watched Black Mirror. I've heard good things.
One of my most favorite shows, but I concede it is a bit of a downer, right? You don't watch it in a light and frothy mood and kind of have a glass of wine, but then you watch it when you're doom scrolling and like late at night with all the curtains down and headphones on, noise cancelling on. It's not a light and fluffy show, but there was an episode of Black Mirror where a woman loses her husband.
Okay.
And she basically is very lonely after he passes away and decides to use a chat service. And the chat service claims to be able to keep you company for a start, but also they can talk to you in the voice of a family member or friend if you give it access to all of their data. And the data in that episode was like all their social media interactions.
Right, okay.
So if they were posting a lot on social media, then scrub that data and mimic what the husband would look like and talk like and sound like. If it's just chat-based, then that's totally fine. It seems like you're talking to your kind of sad. Again, this is not a live show. So you could talk to your significant other using the AI bot. But then the episode takes it a bit further, which says, oh, well, we've gotten so good at this that we can now make a real life version, like a flesh bot, essentially. And it gets really weird and kind of a bit unsavory. This article kind of is in that same vein, which is kind of scary.
Replica users fell in love with their AI chatbot companions, then they lost them all.
Replica is a service I did not know about, and is also a service I will not be engaging the use of, because what it is that first part of that Black Mirror episode where it's a chat service that uses AI. I don't think to mimic a loved one. I don't think they're at that stage yet, but just purely an online chat service powered by AI.
Right.
And I guess you could type in, I mean, it is kind of dating or in that kind of vein to keep people company. So you can type in things you like to talk about and what your preferences are. And I think there's an avatar as well, so you can tell the service what you want them to look like. And over time, people really felt a connection with this AI until Valentine's Day recently.
Less than 2 years later, the Jose she knew vanished in an overnight software update. The company that made and hosted the chatbot abruptly changed the bot's personalities so that their responses seemed hollow and scripted.
So there was a firmware update, essentially, that scrubbed the AI of its personality that these people fell in love with. That's very scary in that AI is able to mimic this intimacy, get close to whatever version we feel is intimacy. But also this company has got a lot of responsibility, I guess, to hold on to these people's hopes and dreams, right? They do a firmware update.
Right.
We're very worried about all of this, and it's going to seep into our lives in more ways than we expect. But AI, we've got our eye on you. Which brings me to our next recurring segment, Whose Job Is It Anyway? Which is our attempt at finding big issues and big headlines that are relevant to a lot of people's careers and jobs and really the whole economy at large. We are not economists. I think that's very clear.
We should put that as part of our disclaimer.
We do not need to put that. No one will suspect for a second that we're economists. No. Right? It'll be very obvious. The reason we're talking about this is that I think science and business obviously are connected, and the more advanced science technology becomes, the more entwined it becomes. We're not the Wall Street side of business that seems impenetrable to people who don't know much about it like us. Just it filters down to our everyday lives. How many more bills are we going to have to pay? There's a looming recession. We all have to worry about pitching pennies. And so this is not one article. This is a series of articles. They all paint quite an alarming trend. And the first article...
Drug maker Eli Lilly caps the cost of insulin at $35 a month, bringing relief for millions. The move puts the drug maker in line with the popular provision in the Inflation Reduction Act that capped the medication's costs for seniors on Medicare.
Insulin, of course, is used to treat diabetes. It's one of the drugs that's used to treat diabetes, but probably it's the most prominent one. And the cost being $35 a month. This is, as we said, in the United States.
That's right.
The cost of any drug in any country is subject to a whole bunch of different factors.
Highly variable.
In Australia, we talked about a little bit with respect to certain advisory committees that have to decide if a drug is subsidized or paid for by the government in part. But this is something to do with a drug becoming a lot cheaper, this insulin drug in the States. Good news, I think, the fact that it's come down. Idea that it had to come down to $35 a month, which, by the way, is not that cheap either.
No, it's still not a small amount of money.
Right, $35 a month is still
for a chronic illness.
And again, it's unclear if it's for one person's worth of dosage. What if your whole family has diabetes?
Yeah, presumably one person's dosage, which would be variable in itself. So, and
if you've got a big family and genetically you're predisposed to diabetes, that could be 100, 200 a month. Yeah. So that's not a cheap amount of money. And the article further goes on to state what is at stake for these companies when they bring the price down.
3 major drug makers, so Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi, apparently dominate the insulin market.
Wow. Okay. And insulin is, like all the drugs, under pretty tight regulation as to how it's made and who can make it.
Yeah, that's right.
And the original version of insulin was a pretty savvy biotechnology move. They used the insulin gene. They put it inside a bacteria. I've just talked to my students about it this week, actually.
Yeah,
bacteria make protein at least 1,000 times faster than any sort of animal human cell can. So if you used human cells to make a protein, you're not going to get enough yield for it to be scalable. You're not going to be able to make enough of it to make any money, certainly. But if you use bacteria to express a human gene and you manipulate that system, bacteria can make a whole bunch of that protein very quickly and much more cheaply. So that's kind of how it was first.
That's right. Obviously, it's further purified once it's expressed.
You did just take it from the bacteria and start injecting it. But that's the system that was used.
That's right,
If you want to do this yourself and you wanted to actually make insulin yourself, first of all, who would you sell it to? Who would be happy buying it from you is the first question. And also, you need the technical and hands-on skill, know-how to be able to do all that, which is a big if. But yeah, it is regulated, right? So that's what these three companies have control over this process. Again, this is good news. Right, the fact that a drug price is coming down, the fact that people, and so many people, have to rely on this drug and pay this price and is subject to this volatility in the market.
That's right.
That's very worrying.
So differently priced across the world as well.
Differently priced across the world. The estimates of the number of people with diabetes varies country to country. This article says in the US, he estimates to be about 8.4 million people have some version of diabetes in the US. So that is a significant portion of people who need to have access to these drugs or some version of these drugs. I also don't think this market is shrinking anytime soon. Diabetes,
no, I don't think so.
Has a strong genetic element. Also, societal factors make it quite difficult to control. I think more and more people are going to get diabetes. This is not a shrinking market. Anytime you see drug prices, patient bases that are expanding rather than shrinking, something needs to be calibrated there, right? Because it's very easy for incentives either way to make things look a little strange.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the next article, all around the Australian sector in this space. And this is not insulin, but it's another diabetic drug.
Ultra-fast insulin drug, VASP or FIASP, to be removed from PBS, making it unaffordable for many diabetes sufferers.
If you're an American listener, this is not your public broadcasting service, PBS channel. This is an Australian acronym. This is our pharmaceutical benefit scheme. If a drug is on our PBS, it basically makes it a lot cheaper for people.
Subsidized.
The government subsidizes it and pays the drug company whatever the difference is that the general public does not have to pay as long as we have access to a Medicare card. In Australia, we're blessed with a version of universal healthcare that everyone has access to, pretty much. This drug has now become a lot more expensive because the reverse has happened, right? So instead of being added to this register,
it's being removed. You'll go from $7 a month to $280 a month, private prescription price.
That's like a 40x increase in price, right? Again, $280 is not the most amount of money in the world. But who wants to pay an extra $280 a month if you didn't have to, right?
That's right.
That's a huge price bump.
It is a fast-acting insulin.
Okay, so it's a version of this drug. And there's market volatility and price changes. Again, kind of strange, right? Kind of strange is all happening.
What's going on with insulin?
What's going on with insulin? What's going on with diabetes? Is it because of an article we talked about in previous episodes, like Ozempic, which also is relevant to diabetes. The fact that there was a drug shortage and that there was supply chain issues. And this is a big market of patients, a large multi-million user, multi-million patient set of factors to consider. The common thread here is that there's a lot of people needing these medications.
Yes.
And therefore, all the economic factors are constantly being scrutinized.
Yes.
It's affecting someone's bottom line either way. And it's not just drug companies, not just patients, not just governments. Big tech obviously wants a slice of this pie as well.
Yeah, that's true.
They're talking about diseases as a pie is kind of gross, but that's kind of how it's viewed in different sectors. And this is a recent headline around Apple. It's bid for this piece.
Apple is reportedly closer to bringing no-prick glucose monitoring to the watch.
The Apple Watch, which we're both wearing, so this is not an ad. Neither of us. We wish we were sponsored by Apple, but we're not. The sensors that are already on the Apple Watches, which vary from blood oxygen to heart rate. Now they're wanting to bring in a new sensor which will measure blood glucose non-invasively. The technology that they're proposing is a laser-based optical density measurement of the skin, of the veins near the wrist, I guess, which I presume...
Something about the refractory index of glucose. And,
yes. I don't know much about retention and podcasts, but I know refractory index is definitely a negative correlator for audience retention. Refractory index, turn the volume right down. I know more about YouTube analytics. It's definitely going to tank our YouTube analytics. I'll see a spike downwards as soon as you said refractors, down straight away.
What happened at this particular time point? Amanda said the words refractory
index was enough to turn off our audience. So I think it's to do with how see-through a certain part of the skin is, because it kind of needs to be pretty see-through
Yeah,
for the
that's
laser to be
right.
able to get a reading.
So it could do me really well.
Yeah, your
I'm practically transparent.
lasers that would basically scan and take a reading through it. We can compare it to technology we use very routinely in molecular biology labs, a spectrophotometer.
That's right, yeah.
And you put liquid into a clear little container that we call cuvette.
Yes.
And that cuvette goes in and it does the same kind of thing. It passes a reading through. It is notoriously finicky.
Yes.
If you have a little bit of condensation on the side of the cuvette, just a little bit, like a little bit foggy, the reading is completely off.
Yeah.
So how reliable this wrist-based measurement of blood glucose will
look.
be is an open question. Right? They're not quite there yet, so I don't think it's ready for prime time.
Aren't there patches now that can measure blood glucose? I think there is.
But the patches have access to blood.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so
but I mean, technology is
yes, technology has gotten further. The pin prick on the finger is not that inconvenient, but it is a little bit of a jab every day or however many times you do it a day. But this is supposed to be non-invasive. Whoever can get this technology to market will make an absolute killing. They don't just want to play the confirmed diagnosis diabetic patient base. They want to go preventative route because they want to say, hey, you'll know ahead of time if you are pre-diabetic. Currently, the technology is tabletop sized. A spectrophotometer is smaller than a tabletop.
Smaller than a tabletop. Whose table is this?
I don't know what's going on.
A child's table?
Yeah.
Yeah. The spectrophotometer is what? I don't know, about
it's like
30 or 40 by 50 centimeters?
Yeah, 10 MacBook Pros stacked on top of each other. It's kind of like the size of a spectrophotometer.
You're using the MacBook Pro as a standardized unit of measurement.
Yeah, so the Mac language.
Well, we're on the Apple theme.
10 laptops would have a variety stacked on top of each other.
They should have used that, not tabletop.
That would have been fine.
Oh, okay, I understand. Oh, what an advance.
Yeah, but
MacBook Pros.
So I don't think it's quite ready for the next iteration of Apple Watch. But this comes back to the idea, hey, this is big money we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anytime big money overlaps with big demand, potential demand.
In an increasingly health conscious
I think it's good in many ways, but it's really worrying that a slight shift in pricing for one of these drugs will cause so much ripple effect throughout all of our lives and throughout these industries.
Absolutely.
And if you are a person who is afflicted by this disease or at risk for this disease, and I'm one of these people, right? So I have a strong family history of diabetes. 6 months ago, I decided to just check things out, how my certain indicators were looking. They were looking a little bit off. I wasn't diabetic. I wasn't even pre-diabetic, but they were just looking a little bit off.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I don't want to be at the mercy of all of these factors. I don't want to have the latest Apple Watch to know if I'm pre-diabetic.
Yeah, of course.
I do not want to have to go on these medications, but I don't have to. Not to say it's bad to be on these medications, but pricing will go up and down. The drug that might work for you might be in short supply for a reason that is inexplicable. There might be new drugs that come out that will work much better for you, that posit it as a cure.
Because, right now, I think there's no true generic insulin.
We can project this for any kind of disease that's kind of non-infectious, that's part of a genetic or environmental factor. I don't want to be at the mercy of it. If you've watched my YouTube channel for a little while and you watch videos from like earlier last year to now, you'll see a very clear difference.
No Ozempic face.
I do not have I kind of have a Ozempic face, but I'm not on Ozempic. This is not the reason. I couldn't get hold of it even if I tried. Yeah. It's just because I thought, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm at risk. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So, well, I can try and cut out sugar and cut out carbs. Not because I hate sugar or I think it's evil or I hate carbs.
I quite like sugar.
I love sugar. I love carbs. The joke is I have a finite number of cupcakes I'm allowed to eat in my life. And I'm almost at the end. I'm almost had my last cupcake.
Cupcakes are overrated.
Cupcakes are overrated?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm a real fan of dessert. Kind of cut dairy as well. Again, we're not a health and well-being kind of podcast. I'm just trying to relay my own experiences.
Yeah.
I personally don't want to be at the mercy of all these market forces.
And even as highly trained research scientists, it's a minefield, isn't it? To try and figure out what you're supposed to do. Because you want to be able to take some kind of action.
Yeah, and grocery shopping has been exhausting because every single snack has a ton of sugar in it. I just can't avoid it, right? All the things I used to love increase my risk by a certain factor. What am I willing to risk for? I'm not willing to risk for more cupcakes, that's for sure.
No.
Right? I can't control any of these market forces.
You just drink black coffee now.
Yeah, I just drink black coffee.
It's a sad drink.
It's not sad. It's totally fine. I feel very sophisticated asking for an Americano. It's very fine. It is a little weird, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a very social thing to go out and not join in and have cake. Yeah. Birthday parties are a bit of a downer. Bit of a downer. Oh, no sugar for me. Everyone looks at you a little weirdly. But like, what's the alternative? Like,
That's right.
I don't want to be at the mercy of these factors. It's so quickly moving.
And you said it's made quite a difference to you, right? You've lost a significant amount of weight, but also your blood sugar has stabilized a lot.
Thankfully, it worked. Imagine cutting everything that brings you joy in life and have no consequence on your overall health.
Then I would just be like, screw it.
then I'm
Go nuts. Yeah.
like genetically, I'm very much at risk. Got a strong family history of it. I thought I was feeling fine. I didn't think I needed to like lose a ton of weight or make a bunch of changes. I just thought, let me just go and check that I'm totally fine. I think I'm totally fine. I just want some confirmation I'm doing amazing. And the doctors are actually, you're not doing that great. So changing diet and really not much else, just a diet. Thankfully, for the moment, my indicators are back to normal range. Yeah. But it doesn't take much for me to kind of go into the other more at-risk area again. And the joke is everything I eat turns into caramel in my blood.
Your blood is caramel.
That's right. Everything I eat, it's got a tiny bit of sugar, it just turns into caramel. We are not a health advice type podcast.
No,
I'm not advocating
Jack's personal experience.
No, I'm not advocating for all of you to cut sugar. In fact, eat as much sugar as you possibly can while you still can. Again, I think I've had my last cupcake.
You've had your last cupcake.
I've had my last cupcake, but it's because of factors out of my control. And what I want as an individual is to always have as many things within my control as possible, especially as it relates to health.
You don't want to be medicated so young if you don't have to. So
again, nothing wrong with medication, but apparently this kind of medication is so unpredictable as to its availability, its pricing, and what's going to happen next. I think I've had my last cupcake. And I've also had my last diet soda, which brings me to our crossover of the week.
Common sweetener erythritol tied to high risk of stroke and heart attack. Now, this was quite a high profile article, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was published in the journal Nature Medicine. Yeah. And unless you're in the field, you probably don't realize what that word nature really communicates.
Has connotations of.
You publish in Nature, what does that mean? Nature is one of the most high profile journals that any scientist can hope to publish.
That's right.
And once upon a time, I don't think it's the case anymore, your dream as a scientist was to get one single Nature publication. Because if you've done it once, you've proven that you can publish and work at the highest possible level in the field.
It can be career making.
And once you have that paper, you can then convince people to give you more money and more prestige. You can get your pick of jobs. Yeah. I don't think it's quite as accessible these days, but still, I think it's harder than ever to publish in Nature.
Absolutely.
So this is published in Nature
Medicine.
Nature Medicine. And that's a really big deal. That is not a headline that we glossed over. We read this
nothing to ignore.
We read this one pretty carefully. Yeah, read this one pretty carefully. The article is not the study itself. The article is news interpretation of the article's findings. Yeah. What did the researchers do in this study?
They analysed blood samples from just over 1,000 participants, and they found multiple compounds linked to cardiovascular risk. However, erythritol had some of the strongest links to the risk of cardiovascular events. They also found that participants in the US and European cohorts with the highest 25 percentile erythritol blood levels were 2.5 and 4.5 times more likely to have a cardiovascular event than those in the lowest 25 percentile.
Basically consume erythritol more consistently and therefore have a higher volume of it, level of it in your blood.
You're more at increased risk of cardiovascular events.
The blood clotting as well, which is connected, of course, to lots of different things, not just cardiovascular. But if you consume or you had a higher level of erythritol, you were more likely to clot in your blood. This is my hot take. Yeah. Does anyone eating artificial sweetener really think that there's no cost to pay? My hot take. Surely you were
Don't take my Coke Zero away.
Surely you were consuming this realizing you have to pay the piper at some point. That's my hot take.
Okay.
I know it's billed as being very safe, but how can it just taste sweet but have no calories and have no other impact?
You're a suspicious person.
Yeah, like I'll take the calories sometimes, you know?
Can't this be a modern miracle?
Apparently it's not, although this study is not confirmation of a death sentence for artificial sweeteners in all our foods.
No, it's more of a warning. Studies they've done are concerning. And so they're saying here, through multiple tests, they found that increased erythritol levels indicated higher rates of clot formation and increased thrombosis potential.
Neither of those things are good for people consuming it, nor the makers of artificial sweeteners. This is a specific type of artificial sweetener, erythritol, but
that's right.
I'd be surprised if this kind of similar finding won't happen next with other artificial sweeteners.
Yeah, I'd like to look at the paper in more detail to see what the other compounds they looked at were, if they were other artificial sweeteners or why erythritol in particular. There are other common ones.
And the researchers did concede that the conclusion of the paper was not that artificial sweeteners are globally bad, but that this kind of study needs to happen more frequently to get more long-term data on this, because it's very much a part of people's lives. You know, a lot of people drink
and something that
a lot of artificial sweeteners.
People are very undecided about whether it's okay for them to have or not. There's been a lot of different research out there. Some I remember a while back, I think it was suggesting that regularly consuming these compounds increase like your craving, eating sweet things. There's a lot of back and forth in the research about whether it's good or bad or okay.
And this seems to have been the most definitive piece of work so far that firmly puts it in the negative camp and a really high profile journal.
Absolutely.
If you are not in this area and you read headlines like this all the time about, hey, someone else told me the thing I like is really deadly or gives me cancer. And a lot of these could be students or students trying to talk about this to their parents, right? Because I think that's another responsibility. I teach a lot of science students, and even if they don't go on and become research scientists, I tell them, look, you do have a bit of responsibility here because you're learning about this at a level that most people, like 95% of people, never approach. So you do have to then go out there into the community and talk about it at the very least with your friends and family.
Absolutely.
And scientific issues are becoming more and more prevalent in our everyday lives. You can't really ignore it anymore.
No, not at all.
My advice to them when they look at any kind of headline around this thing you liked is now bad, right? Or this thing you like causes cancer.
That's the summary of the title,
Yeah, this thing you love is going to kill you. Try and pass through its significance because there are a few telltale signs if it's really something you should pay attention to versus something that is probably a risk factor for a sub portion of the population. But as long as you're not doing it to the extremes, you're probably not going to be affected too much either way. And the first one is we already talked about is how prestigious the journal is that the article, the original research was published in.
It's not an indicator 100% of the time, but it does give us an idea of how trusted the research can be because of how rigorous the review process would have been.
I have colleagues who routinely publish in Nature. They tell me that back and forth submitting the paper easily, 10 times?
So many times, yeah.
Easily. Every time they ask for a lot more work, and it could be 2-3 years from initial point of submission.
And this is, through a process used by journals called peer review.
Yes.
Which is where experts in the field give feedback, ask questions, basically want to test the validity of the claims that are made.
If you do 1 or 2 rounds of back and forth with reviewers, that's usually enough. Otherwise, they reject you outright. That's kind of been my experience. But these journals, they really want every time to back and forth many times, and each time they want so many more experiments to be done. It's not worth it, but in this case, if it's a big enough and important enough finding, it's in this paper, it's worth doing. So anyway, this journal, Nature suite of publications, is very, very significant. So that's not the thing that's going to give it away, all right? The next thing you look at, other than the outlet that it was published in, is how many people was the study looking at? In this case, it was over 2,000 participants. They looked at thousands, very broadly. I think that's good. Yep. If it was hundreds, you'd be a little bit more concerned.
That's right.
I'd be more comfortable with tens of thousands from multiple countries. But it seems like they dabbled it from the United States and Europe. So yeah, it is multiple countries.
Yep, so different sort of genetic backgrounds, which is important.
So that's good. Not a red flag in this case either. And look at me critiquing a Nature paper. You don't need me to critique a Nature paper. It's clearly been through vetting. But I'm just trying to walk through the logical process.
Steps that you would look at.
So filter. So I don't think the sample size is a red flag for any point of concern. Then you want to see what kind of data they're analyzing. I don't recommend looking at data presented in Nature journals unless you're kind of in the field, because it will look really opaque. You'll see crazy graphs, you'll see lots of different plots, and you'll see statistical tests. So I don't recommend the graphs, but I recommend looking through the methods section to see what kind of work actually was done. When they looked at thousands of participants, and they were trying to do statistical comparisons to check if there was a connection between one factor being high and another factor being high.
That's right. And you'd want to be careful with something like this because obviously cardiovascular risk would be multifactorial. So there'd be a lot of different things you'd need to take into consideration in a study like this.
And the authors do concede that a limitation is that there could be other confounders.
That's right.
Other variables they didn't control.
And it's tricky. So they're adjusting risk based on age, smoking status, blood pressure, cholesterol levels, etc. And conceding that it's possible that unmeasured confounders may be present, such as diet, which could have affected the results.
Probably did their best to control for it, but across a few thousand people, you may have missed a confounder that is going to bias the results. Not to mention, even choosing several thousand people from a few different countries, there will inevitably be confirmation bias. It won't be a purely neutral recruitment process. It just can't be, right? Like, people do have to volunteer for it at some level. So it may be people who are more worried about it, or maybe people who saw it and thought it would be relevant. So there are these social, cognitive, psychological factors that these studies typically don't control for.
No, it's hard to delve into it.
It may be impossible to do that. It's just saying this kind of study needs to continue to get more data. Right. This kind of population-wide analysis, very rarely is it what we call causal. Very rarely can it pinpoint one thing will definitely cause the other. Erythritol will definitely cause cardiac arrest or cardiac disease or blood clotting. It'll
Can't
just
be.
if you consume erythritol by this much more, then your risk of the other thing will go up by this much more. But it's an association.
A correlation.
That's right. One thing goes up, the other goes up, or one thing goes down, the other thing goes down. But it's not causal. For it to be causal, you need to conduct it in a tightly controlled experimental setting, which we call an intervention study. So that's the other thing you have to be on the lookout for. You can't really do it in an intervention study at scale. Unlikely. Certainly if it's the first kind of study, it's cost too much. It's
expensive, very expensive.
It's like a full-blown clinical trial at that point, right?
Expensive.
So then you do need the population-wide study that really can't give you the causal connection. So they've got that piece of it in this paper, and then you need the intervention study where they give people the thing that is supposed to increase the other thing.
And then say, hey, what happens?
And so in this case, they did do an intervention study. So again, we're not looking at the graphs and the figures unless you really know a lot about this kind of stuff. You're reading the methods section and seeing what kind of methods they actually used. In this case, they did do both a population-wide analysis as well as an intervention study. Now, how many people was the question was involved in the intervention study?
8.
8 people. What did they make these people do? They gave them the erythritol.
In a prospective pilot intervention study, and it's got an ID here. It's a link to a clinical trials database or registry where you can actually click on this link and have a look at the details of the trial, which is very interesting.
So this is a clinical trial.
Yeah, you could click on this link and have a look at the study itself, which is something that people might want to do. So they were saying that erythritol ingestion in healthy volunteers, number is 8, induced marked and sustained more than 2 days of increases in plasma erythritol levels, well above thresholds associated with heightened platelet reactivity and thrombosis potential in vitro and in vivo studies.
So they did take it to the next level.
That's right.
And reproduce the observation under a causal connection within a tightly controlled group. And they did register it with the clinical trials, which I wouldn't expect anything less at this kind of level of publication. But it's in 8 people.
Yeah.
Right. It's an event. That's the one thing that often is the caveat in this kind of stuff, because with 8 people, all of those issues that affected the 1,000 people group of possible confounders and confirmation bias and choosing people that were already at risk of this kind of stuff, that's of course magnified and amplified.
So they've just called it a prospective pilot intervention study. So it's a small scale interventional study here.
Based on this, it's not enough to throw out all of the Diet Coke or whatever diet soda or stevia artificial sweetener you have in your pantry. But it's cause for alarm. And again, I come back to my hot take. Were you really consuming it thinking there would be no price to pay at some point, right?
You're too suspicious.
There should be punishment for enjoyment. There should be a trade-off. When you're enjoying something, that you should know something bad is coming. Some point. There's got to be a trade-off, right? And this may be the trade-off, it may not be. If you were consuming a lot of artificial sweetener, consider reducing it perhaps, but I think keeping an eye out for it is a good thing too.
And I think this will be a watch this space, because I imagine that they're taking this to the next level trial, probably having a look at more participants, longer term study probably to see what happens long term.
And best case scenario, it would be enough to alert the people making artificial sweetener and double down on the investment and finding the part of it that is contributing to this risk, and hopefully engineering a better version of it, a sweet flavor without the risk of any of these diseases. So hopefully this spurs on more innovation.
It's not stevia. I'm not a fan.
Not a fan of stevia. We're not sponsored by stevia, but if we were, you just ruin any chances of us getting that sponsored for the future. Sorry, Bats. That brings us to the end of yet another episode of Crossover Connections. We'll learn about global market forces and all of these drug companies, as well as always keep an eye out on artificial intelligence, AI, and those dirty bats with their incredible immune systems and frustratingly mobile and agile fitness routines. Those bats just get more infuriating with every article we read.
They make me even more angry.
If you've been watching along on YouTube, thanks for following along, as well as on the podcast platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, really anywhere you find your podcast. Thank you for listening. This is episode 4 of the Crossover Connections podcast. I'm Jack.
And I'm Amanda.
Hope to connect with you again this time around in the next episode.